Hello and welcome to SpeakUp Talks. My name is Claire Dossett, and today's topic is bringing the ethics back into ethics and compliance. And I am delighted to say that I am joined by Michaela Alberg. For those of you who don't know, and I'd be surprised if there's many, Michaela Alberg has worked within the ethics and compliance industry for over 20 years now for organisations like Volvo, Telia Sonera, Getting, and most recently with Transparency International in Sweden. Over the years, Michaela has seen compliance crises firsthand from the inside, but more recently has spent the last 5 years working deliberately on the ethics specifically, and is now launching Leap and the Leap series platform this summer. So, welcome, Michaela, and I would love to hear a bit more about Leap and what is happening there.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks for having me. Thanks for hosting me. So happy to join. So yes, it's starting to become a little bit embarrassing because my professional career is becoming so long. It's difficult to even get your arms around it. But I like to describe my work, or professional career, as a journey.
Yeah.
And, I started out as a lawyer. I worked with the law. And then 20 years ago or around, I started working with what we call legal and compliance. Some people might think that that is like a cake upon another cake because it's the same thing, or some people might think it's incomprehensible. But after a while, the whole profession changed a little bit, so it became very important to talk about ethics and compliance. So the profession became ethics and compliance, and a little bit more independent of legal. So and I followed this journey. So, but after, as you said, after like 40 years or 35 years, I started to realize that we are actually talking about ethics and compliance, but what we are working with is compliance. We work with effective compliance programs. We work with all the important elements of compliance. So I'm not at all saying that this is not important, but we are really not doing anything on the ethics side.
Yeah.
So that's when I started, when I had the opportunity at Getinge, which was my last formal employer. And they gave me the opportunity to really work with ethics, and I created this program there, which we call responsible leadership, that dealt with ethics and why good people make bad choices. What is it that we think we are so ethical, but in fact we are not so ethical when it comes down to it? So that's what I have spent time doing. And then when I left Getinge, I felt like, well, either I retire or I do this all again. So I have created, together with partners, this new platform which we call Leap Series, Leading with Ethics and Purpose, and where we have focused on ethics and why good people make bad choices.
And tell me, what made this the moment to make that work public and scalable now, this summer?
Yeah. So I think I think it's a little bit random to, because you want to have reasons for everything you do. But I really think it was that I had the time. Because when you work in a big organization, you're so busy all the time. You have the Teams calls, you have the meetings, you're supposed to be everywhere, and you're supposed to be a good manager and supposed to be a leader. So you never have time. You never have time to reflect. You never have time to connect the dots. And if you don't have time to do that, you don't have anything to give either. So it's like, so I felt I had time. But now, because a lot of people have said, well, this is not the time for an ethics platform. This is not the time for ethics training. We are so busy with the compliance part. But I think this is exactly the time for ethics. And I think that in order to really be there on time, you have to be a little bit ahead of the curve. But not too much, but a little bit. So I really think it is time for ethics. And I think a lot of people agree with me.
It's really interesting you say that because it's a very common argument right now. Compliance teams are stretched, regulatory demand is up, resources just haven't followed. And the answer a lot of organizations land on is ethics can wait. You think that's probably a little backwards. Why is that?
Yeah, I think it depends on how you see ethics. If you see ethics as a kind of an impact cushion that you have on top of compliance, because if you have a little bit extra, the impact will be lighter
Yeah,
when you hit. But I don't see ethics like that at all. I see ethics and our values and our own responsibility for our decisions that we make as the platform where we build compliance. So I think that ethics today in this regulatory, people call it the regulatory tsunami, but I really question if that is the case. But in this world where we feel we have a lot of regulatory pressure, I think then ethics becomes more important, because if you know who you are and you know your base, it is easier to make the right decisions. And to be honest, both you and I and most of the people who are listening to this knows that the big scandals, the big wrongdoings, they don't come out of people not understanding the law. They come out of something else.
yeah. You're correct. There's also strong data to back up the argument. If I just share some examples of the poor ethics and compliance that we've actually seen over recent years, Wells Fargo. Management built a culture so fixated on sales volume that employees opened millions of unauthorized accounts in customers' names, and leadership knew the pressure was causing it. The result, widely known, was that 3 billion in settlements, a CEO resignation, and 39 billion US dollars in foregone profits. But they're not alone. We've got at Activision Blizzard, a video game developer, a year-long culture of harassment and discrimination went unchallenged because nobody believed in internal channels were safe to use. So
Mm.
the problem never surfaced internally when California regulators filed suit in 2021. Again, 7.7 billion US dollars in market value was wiped out, and legal settlements, I think they topped over 72 million US dollars. In both examples, the compliance program existed, but the ethical culture didn't. But let's look at the other end of the spectrum, examples of strong ethics. It is happening out there at Nike when female employees identified a pattern of harassment and pay inequity. They used Nike's own internal survey process to bring it directly to leadership, and leadership responded. Executives departed and pay equity reviews launched. The same at Ralph Lauren. When Ralph Lauren discovered its Argentine subsidiary had been bribing customs officials, they self reported to the SEC and the DOJ immediately rather than waiting to be caught. So, full cooperation resulted in a non prosecution agreement. In both situations, there was a greater expectation on staff to do the right thing, which helped both organizations avoid scandals.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I'm really happy you also bring up the good examples, because sometimes we're kind of fixated on the bad examples. So, so I think, but I definitely agree with you. But I also think that when we talk about ethics and the need for ethics, I think it's important to connect to trust.
Yes.
Because I think we all agree that trust is like the basic requirement in all our human interactions and in all our human interactions. And trust today in the world overall is really falling down below even 50%. So not only are we talking about distrust, we're talking about people who are dissatisfied who feel grievance. And if you don't have trust, your employees don't trust you as an employer, your customers don't trust you, your other very important stakeholders don't trust you. So how how are we going to rebuild the trust and optimism in society? And trust is measured on two levels. It's measured on what you do, but it's also measured on how you do things. So to have trust, to build trust, you need to know what you're doing. You need to be a good doctor. You need to be a good builder or whatever you're doing. But you also need to do it with ethics, with your integrity.
Yeah.
Then you will rebuild trust again. And I think that that is a really important point today because it might seem like academic, but what we see in society today is really a result of the lack of trust.
And so tell me, what does that conversation actually sound like in practice? I think it'd be interesting for our listeners just to kind of get some, understanding of, are we having lots of conversations? And I know we're always under time pressure, so it'd be interesting to understand a little bit more what that actually looks or sounds like in practice.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the word conversation because when I look back on why I ended up doing what I'm doing right now, I kind of see my life as a journey that goes up and down and here and there. And then there are certain stops, certain points when you understand something, when you realize something important. And one of these stops that I have made is that I believe that ethics is a conversation rather than an answer. And I'm not at all suggesting that we should converse in, forever. But the conversations today are very limited, and we are limiting them without really understanding that that is what we are doing. So I think that if we look at ethics as a conversation, it will also unlock a lot of things that are difficult to approach. Because if you speak with a lawyer about ethics, and that person will feel that, so I'm supposed to provide an answer on what is ethical or not ethical in the same way I provide an answer what is legal or not legal. That doesn't sit right with me. I'm not the moral police. I'm not more ethical than anybody else. So when you unlock that and say, no, no, in ethics, you're not providing answer, you're providing questions. And if somebody comes to you, that's another thing of these things that I have kind of feel is an important stop on my journey is also that it's your choices that define who you are rather than your skills. And we spend a lot of time on our skills, educating and training and all of that. But we spend very little time understanding how we make choices and how we limit ourselves in making these choices. So that's why I come back to in the conversation, we're having this conversation with as much information and as wide eyed as we can be in order for good people to make good choices. Because that's another thing that you and I talk a lot about is that bad people make bad choices. That's not very controversial. But, but why are all these good people around this bad person making all these bad choices?
Yeah.
And that's what we have to kind of focus on, not the bad people. We have to focus on the good people and giving them the best support, inspiration, and challenge to make good choices.
And on that, you've introduced two concepts I wouldn't mind digging into, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, Conduct risk and human risk.
Mm.
So let's start maybe with conduct risk, but I think I'll naturally roll into human risk. But
Yeah.
what is it, and why have we been missing it?
So I think, especially maybe even today, when we feel this regulatory pressure as compliance professionals to look at our job as addressing conduct risk. We are not addressing legal risk. We are addressing conduct risk. We are addressing how people decide and act and do. That's our job. And we do it with all these different compliance and elements that we have been taught, risk assessment and all of this. So I think it is helpful to look at our job as dealing with conduct risk. I also think that that will maybe make it easier for us as a profession to liaise better with other organizations within the organizations, like HR or communications or other parts where we can, you know, link arms. So I think the word conduct risk is really helpful, and I also like to, because risk assessment and understanding risk is something today very normal in any company. When I started working, it was like a big new profession, understanding risk. But now, today, risk is, you know, something we work with all the time. So to introduce conduct risk and human risk makes this more of a hard topic than a soft topic. And it makes it easier to position this in the overall work of what we do in an organization, in a company. So, and conduct risk, when we look at it as conduct risk, we also understand to open up for what I call human risk. Because we know that conduct is not only influenced by the laws and the regulation, it's influenced by something else that makes good people make bad choices. And this is what I call the human risk.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation the other day, just, 2 days ago, with a person who works with risk. And she thought this was really great because it makes it tangible. And then you can introduce and start talking about, well, what is human risk? Well, these are these little factors that we have in our human brains, all of us, that limits our conversations, that trips us up, good people like you and I, to make bad choices. Things like framing, things
Yeah.
like ethical tunnel vision, things like defense mechanisms. So
And
and,
why?
yeah, I'm sorry.
No, 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 I don't mean to interrupt you, Michaela. I was going to say, why does that framing matter?
Yes. And I will take it back to myself again and my journey, because working as a lawyer, and there is a reason I ended up where I am. Working as a lawyer, people ask me, can I have some legal advice? I want legal advice and you stick to this. And I was a lawyer, so of course I give them legal advice, but I felt somehow this is not really right. This is not what I would choose. But I'm a lawyer, I give them the legal frame, and they make their decisions after that. But then I realized, they're not asking me for legal advice. They're asking me, what shall I choose? What shall I decide? And if that is the question that they are actually asking, I need to give them a better answer than just the law. I need to tell them this is the law, but then there are a couple of questions here that I think you need to think about to come down and make the right decision yourself.
Okay, that is really interesting. And so I guess this brings us to what I think is maybe one of the biggest identity questions for the profession right now. You said the role of ethics and compliance is to support, inspire, and challenge, not control.
Yeah.
So what does that shift actually require?
Yeah, it requires that you make yourself less of a very important person. Uh, Well, and also, I mean, we can have long conversations about where to position the ethics and compliance person. And we have spent a long time fighting for what is called a seat at the table, reporting to the CEO, reporting to the chairman of the board, or, elevating the role in the organization. But having been in all of these positions, when I joined Getinge, which was my last role in an organization, I declined being part of the leadership team. I'm not saying that everybody should do it, but I was 60 years old, so I could kind of afford that because they listened to me anyway. Uh, so because I felt that if you're sitting in the leadership team, it is not very collegial to say that, well, I'm not a decision maker. You are. You are, you are, you are. Because what I want to avoid these group decisions. I want people to realize that you make the decision and you are accountable for it. And the very difficult decisions people are paid to make it. So they should be challenged to make them. And when you put an ethics and compliance function with maybe 12 people in an organization with 14,000 people, it is impossible. It is a mission impossible to control what 14,000 people are doing and thinking and deciding. That's that it is important. You're set up to fail. So and also you're not really accomplishing what you want to accomplish, which is to train people to make good encourage and train people to make good choices. So and I think that the concept of control, we have to rethink that a little bit, not only from a compliance perspective, because I was doing an interview with a British colleague of yours, John Higgins, who is a researcher who I adore. And he said, I think it's time to start thinking about the cost of control. What does it cost an organization to control everybody? So I think maybe loosen up the controls and instead supporting people to make good choices. Trust people to make good choices. We talked about trust. So if you have to control people, you are also telling them we don't trust you.
Yeah, and that goes right back to what we were talking about at the beginning
Yeah,
of,
yeah,
of this
yeah.
conversation.
So I really think that for me it feels really good, the support, the inspiration, and the challenge. And the challenge here is that because of the human risk, we avoid difficult conversations, we avoid friction, we feel uncomfortable when people don't agree with us. So and we need the friction. We need the space for reflection with with the uncomfort of not having made a decision, or the discomfort of not having made a decision. That we need that. And I think it's important that you and I and everybody else also make the connection that if we look at ethics as a conversation, if we look at why we are limiting our conversations and work with that, supporting good people making good choices, we are also at the same time supporting innovation and creativity in the organization. Because if we don't have good conversations, we are also suppressing innovation and creativity. So it goes hand in hand. And I'm yet to find a company that is not interested in improving innovation. So it's not just about wrongdoing. So and good decision in that perspective. It's also about listening to people, because you can't have conversations without listening. And we believe we are really great listeners. But there is recent research that shows that managers are spending 83, 84, 85% of their time talking. which leaves very little time to listening. And if we're not listening, we're not having good conversations.
And so do you think right now, Michaela, for a lot of organizations, it really is C&C, compliance and compliance. The E has been quietly removed.
Yes, I think so. And I think it's also because, and that's why which I think you can detect, I'm really passionate about this tool that I have created together with colleagues that brings a tool to work with ethics, because it's not very easy to get the time, to get the space, to get the ideas on how do we work with ethics.
Yeah.
And how we normally do is that we put signs on the basic values on the walls, and we know already from the beginning this is not going to work. But we do it anyway. But I feel that's why I think it's so important to not just say, well, we don't work with ethics anymore. I actually feel I have a tool where we can work with ethics. And I think I have been needing these 40 years of working in international business with law, with legal and compliance, and with ethics and compliance to kind of get to the point where I have something to offer that I think will help people
And bring the E back into ethics and
and
compliance.
bring exactly.
We should get rid of that C&C and bring that back in.
And it's a really good.
I think it's true.
Yeah, and it's a good way of saying it. I'm glad you said it.
We're using it a lot more now. Okay. I do really appreciate your time today. I have one last question, and I'll give you the space here. What's the one thing you'd say to compliance officers listening to this podcast right now who knows something needs to change but doesn't know where to start?
Yeah. Oh, I really,
Big
my
ask.
heart goes out because what I want to say first is like use Leap Series and work with ethics, and you'll get inspiration and fun and meaning back into your job.
Yeah.
But what I also want to say is like a really practical thing, because I have understood that many compliance professionals are struggling with these regulatory requirements that are coming. And I think that work with ethics, do it,
Yeah.
believe in it, believe in it. Because when we work with this in this sort, we are addressing the smallest unit in the company, each and every one of us. So it's like not a quick fix, it is person by person, but that's the only way it will work. But I also want to say, when you think about all these regulations that are coming, maybe not all of them needs to be addressed by you and your organization. Maybe some of them are not very high risk. Then just say that to the executive team or the board that we cannot work with all regulatory risks in the entire world. It doesn't work that way. So we need to make a holistic risk assessment and decide together what regulatory risks are the most important. I feel that is also a place where I see many people struggling because they are launching program after program. Oh, it's data privacy, and now people are freaking out about AI and what are we going to do with sanctions? And it's all of these different things. And maybe sanctions is very important for your company, but maybe in another company it's not a big thing.
Michaela, this has been such a valuable conversation. I thank you again for your time today. The LEAP series launches this summer. People can find you at leadingwithethicsandpurpose.com. We'll make sure that it's in the podcast notes as well. Michaela, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Claire. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Take care.